Is that our cue?
Yep, you can go ahead and get started.
All right. So, good afternoon, everyone, or good morning. I guess it depends where you are. My name is Katie Zerfus. I am from the Pennsylvania PUC, and I'm super excited to help moderate this panel today, which focuses on infrastructure investments. We have a dynamic panel with us today. We have Nick Hellen, Chief Engineer for Gas Distribution with Edison, Zach Kravitz, Vice President of Rates and Regulatory Affairs with Northwest Natural Gas. And we have Paul Metro, who is the former Director of Pipeline Safety with our very own Pennsylvania PUC, but he is now the Director of the Infrastructure Academy at the Energy Innovation Center Institute, which is out of Pittsburgh, for all you Steelers fans out there. But infrastructure investments can mean a lot of things. And quite frankly, I could probably talk myself all day about the various aspects of what this panel could be today, but we only have an hour and it's not about me, it's about our speakers. But our speakers will be talking about pathways to clean energy goals, how these goals fit within their state's regulatory landscape, investments that are being made in relation to consumer behavior. We're going to talk about pipeline integrity and the replacement of, like, say, bare steel or cast iron and or first generation plastic pipes, how to build a pipeline of talents, and I'm using a fun utility pun there, to fill our workforce needs, which is critical to the conversation on investments. And, for me in particular, the workforce component is something that's really important and to me, and I'm passionate about. I am obligated to say that the panel presentation will be recorded and eventually uploaded to our dedicated task force website. The recording you'll see here on the agenda in front of you. The recording will stop for the Q&A with the presenters and for the members only conversation thereafter. It's my understanding that after the Q&A, we will then politely excuse our panelists with our offers of gratitude and thanks. And then we'll partake in some free-flowing conversation between the members of the task force. Again, that will not be recorded. And we have some volunteers, some other commissioners who have volunteered to offer some lessons learned or some other context for the conversation, particularly Commissioner Skrmeta from Louisiana, Friedman from Ohio, and Paradis from Illinois. And I'm happy to participate in that as well. But that's just to get the conversation started. So we hope others have questions and have some other context for the conversation to offer. I don't know if I missed anything. So if folks from NARUC or the Brattle group are ready, or if I missed anything, please let me know. But otherwise, I think we could probably get started. So I would ask each panelist to introduce himself before going into your presentation, talk about a little bit about who you are and where you're from. And we are going to start with Nick Hellen.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Your Honor. My name is Nicholas Hellen. I'm the Chief Engineer for Gas Distribution at Consolidated Edison of a company in New York. I have 23 years in the utility. I spent the vast majority of my time with gas operations or gas engineering. I also have some time with electric operations, as well as customer energy solutions. Engineer by trade, mechanical engineer, graduated from the Cooper Union, and then I went back to school to get my MBA from NYU Stern. So I love the industry, and thanks for having me. So today I'm going to really go over some topics, if you don't mind. Next slide. So this is our agenda. I want to give you some context first, talk about Saucony's franchise, and then get into our regulatory state right now, regulatory context. Then I'm going to discuss our gas long-term plan, which includes different pathways through 2042. And within that, I'm going to give you some details. Then I'm going to go into accelerated depreciation as a form of smoothing out rate impact over time, and then review some of our policy priorities at Con Edison. Next slide, please. So in terms of franchises, this is important to note. We actually have three commodities, two of them shown here. We have gas, electric, and steam. Our gas service territory is smaller than our electric territory, so we have less gas customers, where we cover Westchester, the Bronx, Manhattan, and Queens, parts of Queens. And where you see electric actually has more customers. They have 3.6 million as compared to our 1.1 million. So that's important to understand as it applies to infrastructure investment and the future of gas. Next slide, please. In terms of our distribution system, we have over 4,300 miles of gas distribution main. 65% is lower risk gas materials, which are plastic and protected steel, newer form of plastic. And then 35% are leak-prone gas materials, which is cast iron, wrought iron, and unprotected steel. That doesn't seem to be much, but I have a bullet over here that shows that we're 3% on national inventory. So although we're a smaller service size, you can imagine there's a lot of older leak-prone gas materials in our service territory. Another interesting fact is that over the last 5 years, 94% of our leaks have occurred on mains consistent of leak-prone materials, which really underscores why we want to displace this main and replace it. Next slide, please. So some regulatory context. We have the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, which was effective January 2020. Some of the major tenets behind that are we're looking to reduce GHG emissions 85% as compared to our 1990 levels by 2050. And then we're also looking to, by 2040, we're looking to have 100% renewable electricity within New York. So you can imagine those are aggressive goals. So a lot of what I'm speaking about is how we meet those goals within our what's defined with our gas long-term plan, which was released last year. I did share the link for that. It has a lot of information in it. Obviously, I'm not going to cover all of it, but I'm going to cover some key points in the next 10 minutes or so. So let's go right to it. Next slide, please. So in our gas long-term plan, we define 3 major pathways on where we see the future of gas. Our first is our reference. This really reflects the current legal and policy environment that we have today. So this includes certain gas bans that we have starting 2024, going to 2027 in our service territory. It ultimately amounts to an 18% reduction in gas volume and 21% reduction of emissions from Scope 1 and Scope 3 emissions. Now, of course, earlier I mentioned we're aiming for 85%. 21% by 2042 does not get us to the 85%. But we did chart it out so we could look at what the infrastructure impacts are, and especially to our customers. Our gas supply mix, we're assuming a 5% certified natural gas mix here. And then it also is going to increase our electric peak by 32%. Now, going to the next 2 pathways, we have hybrid and deep electrification. Now, both of these are on track to achieve our CLCPA goals that I mentioned earlier. But they're done in 2 different ways. The hybrid pathway really relies on both clean electricity and low carbon gaseous fuels. It's going to allow us to keep what we consider our hard to electrify customers. And then anybody that's driven through New York City can look around and see all our high rises and all of our large buildings. So we define that in our plan, what hard to electrify means, but you can imagine those are going to be our larger buildings that are going to be much more difficult to electrify. With that plan in place, by 2042, we would reduce our volume by 39%. And by 2042, we're reducing our gas sector emissions by 61%. Now, again, this is 2042. The long-term goals are for 2050. So ultimately, we will get down to the 85%. The gas supply mix does change considerably. We're looking at 38% RNG, 6% clean hydrogen, and then 57% certified natural gas, which does affect our infrastructure plans moving forward. And then for electric peak, we're estimating an increase of 25 to 40% increase in electric peak for Con Edison. I also have noted ORU here. That's Orange Rock, and that's our sister company. And for deep electrification, it is really swinging the pendulum all the way to electrifying almost everything. In that scenario, we're really holding on to only a handful of our customers, some of our really large customers, and that then becomes really difficult to find who do you keep on, who do you keep put off. But doing that reduces our gas volume considerably, and our sector emissions go down to 82%. And then ultimately they get closer to 95% when we're talking about by 2050. This will require 13% RNG and 87% certified natural gas. And an important thing to note here, right? Although we're not talking about electric infrastructure, our electric peak would increase 70% to 105%. And as you can imagine, that would have a large impact on what type of electric infrastructure we will need to go down this particular pathway. Next slide, please. So what we did with this information is we created peak demand forecasts. So our gas system peak demand, which of course is not the same as volume, reduces 16% to 76%, depending on which pathway is chosen. The top line you see on that's our reference pathway. So that's sort of like business as usual, a lot of energy efficiency. We built that bottom up, and that's how we typically do our forecasts. A lot of econometric values are in there. We take a look to see how proficient our energy efficiency programs are going to be, our demand side management programs, how much DG, CHP, oil to gas conversions we have coming. So that's really detailed and granular in terms of how we come up with that particular number. As far as hybrid and deep electrification, there's a lot more unknowns. What we decided to do there, because it is a bit more complicated, we took more of a top-down approach. We said, well, these are the goals that we're going to need to meet, and then we're going to work backwards from there. But then we applied the sales to peak ratio from the reference pathway in order to fill out those numbers, right? So there is a lot more uncertainty there, but we did have a methodology on how we created these forecasts. And I wanted to share that with all of you as well. Next slide, please. So this is really the crux of it, right? Where are we spending our money? So for our reference pathway, right, which is again business as usual, we have funding really going through 2040, which is similar to where we are today. And what you'll see is that large blue piece on the bottom that's labeled as GIRP. A GIRP is just a definition. It's a gas infrastructure replacement and retirement program. And it's really our leak-prone pipe replacement program. And that's just an acronym for it. So you can see the vast majority or close to half of our spend will be on replacing that leak-prone pipe that we currently still have in our system. That 3% of national inventory, that's what we're looking to get down to 0%. And that's what we could accomplish through 2040 if we continue what we're doing today, which is approximately 80 miles of main a year, right? So and then on top of that, you have other programs, other safety programs like public improvement. We consider PHMSA pipe, which is really centered around our transmission pipeline. Those are programs we see no matter what pathway is taken, those are going to move forward. So that's the next chunk between orange and gray. And then the yellow on top of that is really service replacement, which is replacing those leak-prone service materials from our system as well. So those are also safety and reliability programs that we have. So this is where we see our programs going if it's business as usual. Now, going on to the next pathway, which is hybrid. Next slide, please. You start seeing a decrease. And the vast majority of that decrease is really around our main replacement program, which we have considered here. We call GIRP, right, which is the blue part. So you see a larger decrease. And that's because at this point during this pathway, we're letting go. I don't know if the right term is letting go, but we're pretty much eliminating retiring parts of our system. So we're not spending the same money on replacing that infrastructure because it won't be in place anymore. So we took a dive into what areas would we replace, what areas wouldn't we replace, how much is the cost of emergent leaks and things like that when we looked at this type of infrastructure. So that's why you see a large decrease there. But again, as I mentioned earlier, some of the other programs, public improvement and PHMSA pipe, those stay steady throughout the year. So those are similar throughout all these different pathways. And then we do have a decrease also in service replacement as we're not replacing those services because we're not going to have that service territory anymore. Let's go to the next slide. Now, if you're imagining we're going from one end all the way to the other end, deep electrification, we're letting go large swaths of our service territory at a time, right, to get to that point where we really only have a handful of customers, those that we've determined as the hardest to electrify. There you see a huge decrease on our main replacement program, right? And you see our spending go all the way down closer to 100 million as compared to the $1 billion we're at today, right? So that's the far end. So we really want to define, what does it look like today? What can it look like by 2042? And what impacts it would have. Now, it's interesting to note the different spend, but at the same time, while the spending is going down, so is our customer base, right? And that has obviously a large impact on our rates and our impact on customers. So if we go to the next slide. Here's just more reference material on projected costs, on what the differences are for these types of programs, or these, I would say, pathways and not programs. First, the reference pathway, we're going to grow approximately from a 3.5 billion customer cost grow from approximately 3.5 billion to 5 billion by 2042. In the hybrid case, there's this effect, there's this balancing effect as we introduce low carbon fuels into our system, such as hydrogen. We're expecting O&M costs to go up. We're expecting leaks to go up just based on the fact that it's a smaller molecule. It might have impact onto our system. We're still going to have to replace our system before we do that, meaning putting in plastic, getting rid of the leak-prone pipe. So we have to take that into account as well. But some of them, and then the other balancing act is, well, some of the O&M is going to go down if we start retiring our system, right, in pieces. So that's interesting to note in terms of what the impacts are. Deep electrification, this is where you see a huge decline, right? You're going down 51% compared to the reference pathway. And again, that's really
I think our speaker may have froze momentarily.
okay.
Oh.
There we go. No, they're saying, are you sure you want to say that it's being recorded? Could you go to the next slide, please? Okay, thank you. So this is really representative of some of the elements that I was just discussing, right? On the top, the dotted lines represents the sales volume. And so we have reference, hybrid, which is in blue, reference is in gray, and then in green is deep electrification. And then on the other side of the axis, going, well, at least on my screen from left to right, is our system and supply costs. So we really have to look at these side by side to get a good feel for what the impacts are going to be, which I'm going to go to a little bit more. But as you see, right, there starts to become a large gap, especially as you move away from the reference pathway and you start looking at hybrid, but even more so when you start looking at deep electrification, right? There's a large gap in terms of what it's going to cost us to run a safe and reliable system, and what we are getting in terms of sales volume, which obviously will apply pressure to whatever customers are left on the system. So we do have some thoughts around that. One of the topics here is talk about how you smooth out the impact onto your customers. So the next slide would show one particular tool that we could use to do that. That tool is accelerated depreciation. What this particular chart shows you, it just shows you the rate base in millions of reference, hybrid, and deep electrification as you go all the way across to 2042, right? And it's speaking to what we were speaking about earlier, you're going only down to a handful of customers. If you stay on those lines, especially deep electrification, you're still talking about a $9 billion rate base with only a handful of customers. Obviously, we can't do that to the remaining customers. So one thing we have applied here is we changed our depreciation rates from our current 2.6, approximately 2.6, all the way to 10.5, which then allows us to collect on the rate base earlier in the process when the customers are still on the system. So this is something that we all need to think about in utilities if we do go down one of these pathways, and we do have our customer base decrease significantly. So I wanted to mention that here as a potential tool. It's not the only tool that could be used in order to accomplish that, but I know that was one part of our conversation leading into this presentation. So if we could go on to the next slide. So another thing I wanted to bring up is MPAs. All right, we're talking about how to shrink the system, non-pipeline alternatives, and what tools we have. And I want to discuss some of the tools we have today in Con Edison to do that. First, the process for MPAs is identifying our system needs, right? That's done through infrastructure planning. And I'm going to bring up the two types of MPAs we have on the next slide. After we identify our needs, we do what's called a suitability criteria. We look how long will it take to actually implement the alternative tools and the alternative solutions to our customers. We put it through competitive solicitation and program development. How do we best address this need? And then it finally goes through a BCA where we're really weighing out the benefits of implementing the alternative solutions versus the cost of alternative solutions. So let me go into slightly more detail on the next slide. So here are some existing MPAs we currently have at Con Edison. Our first is our gas main replacement program. So we were speaking earlier about a leak-prone pipe. Instead of replacing a leak-prone pipe, we're offering incentives to those customers on that pipe to get off of our gas system and to be electrified, right? And then you see some of the tools and some of the appliances you have down below with these nice pictures. We're really only targeting at this point radial mains that are low number of customers, 1 to 5, because as you put more and more customers on this program, it'll be more and more difficult to not have to replace that pipe. So we do have that underway. We do have a couple of successful radial mains that we're going to look to abandon with this program. But again, really small at this point. We're going to look to continue to develop that. A larger way to look at MPAs is through our gas distribution system reinforcement program. Wherever we see a need to grow the system, for example, put your reinforcements, do a retrofit on a regulator, do some type of work that's what we consider a traditional solution. Instead of doing that traditional solution, we go out to an area, and we have an example here. This is Soundview area in the Bronx. And we're asking customers to take both, we're incentivizing customers to take both gas EE measures and electrification measures so that we don't have to do that reinforcement, right? So this is a way to kind of balance out that. Again, we only have a handful of these going on right now, but we're going to look to grow these processes and these tools as we move forward, and thinking of how do we naturally shrink the system and get customers off our system so that we're using less fuel to meet those longer term goals. Next slide, please. So this is the last slide. What are our policy priorities? First is really around safety, reliability, and resiliency. And no matter what pathway, no matter what we do, that's number one. Secondly, we have reducing the capital investment in the system by gradually reducing the gas footprint. That's shown through our MPA program, right? And that's one methodology to do that. We're also looking to emphasize the importance of system reliability during the clean energy transition. As you see, and I showed in the slide earlier, you're going to have a large impact on the electric system while you do this as well, right? So we really have to take that into consideration. We're also going to continue to advocate for significant increases in energy efficiency because no matter where we go, no matter what we do, that's going to help either the gas system or the electric system, and for that matter, the steam system. So we're going to look to continue that. That's a win-win for everyone. So that's what I have, and hopefully we get to speak a little bit later as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nick. That was really great. I took a lot of notes. So stick around for the Q&A at the end, and we're going to go to our next speaker, Zach Kravitz.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Zach Kravitz, Vice President of Rates and Regulatory Affairs at Northwest Natural. And we're looking at a beautiful view here of the Columbia River Gorge. On the right side of the screen is Oregon, and on the left side is Washington. And our company is situated where we serve both sides of that gorge. Nick, following your presentation, I have to say that it works. I think it's going to mesh really nicely because you had a lot of long-term views in there. And I think I'm kind of zooming down a little bit into really the near-term, kind of short-term needs of the gas system and kind of putting a spotlight on our capital profile. And I want to do that by talking a little bit about this two realities that we are kind of facing right now, and Nick hit on one of those at the end of his presentation, which is we are an energy service provider, and that is the most critical and important role that we have, and we must provide safe, reliable energy during those really, really cold snaps in the wintertime. The other reality that we're facing is we have new climate policies, and I'm going to focus on Oregon, but that are really driving a change in the way that we think about our business going forward, and effectively turning us to some extent into a decarbonization company as well. And thinking about that, where our winter peak is extremely important, and we're seeing a growing winter peak, and at the same time we have very, very significant emission reduction climate policies that are getting placed upon our company. And so from there, I want to talk a little bit about our capital profile, and this is a near-term capital profile. And then next, talk a little bit about so what does that mean, and where do we see the gas system going here out in the Pacific Northwest, and what are some of the near-term proposals that we are currently making in Oregon right now to address that. So I will advance the slide here, and just a little bit about Northwest Natural Gas Company. We have about 800,000 connections. That serves 2.5 million people. 90% of our service territory is in Oregon, along the I-5 corridor from Portland down south to the coast and along the gorge. And then about 10, maybe 11% of our service territories in Southwest Washington, and that also extends along the gorge as well. On the right side of this screen, I have our map of our water and wastewater utilities, not the topic of the day, but wanted to just highlight that. We're new to this space. We acquired our first water utility in 2017. We now own and operate over 25 systems in 5 states. And it's not the topic today, but it's something I'm really passionate about: the growth of this industry, the fragmented nature of water utilities throughout the country, and really proud of the way that platform has developed. But I'll get back to gas. So I wanted to also start with Northwest Natural, just a little bit of our system snapshot. I think each system, each gas system, is going to have a little bit different story to tell you, and they're all going to be unique, and they're all going to have their own challenges. And really, there's probably a 100-year story to tell that kind of brought us to today, and where each system is headed. And for us, that's unquestionably true. We're 165 years old. A little bit older than the state of Oregon. Get all of our gas supply, 60% from Canada, 40% from the Rockies. We've got Williams Pipeline that comes down through our system. That is the major interstate pipeline that serves our territory. We have 2 LNG peaker plants, and missed underground gas storage facility, which is a incredibly important resource for our company. We have 11, just under 12 BCF of gas storage serving our customers, and that is what we really lean on and rely on during those cold winter spells that we do get out here in the Portland area. We also have a North Mist underground storage facility, and not really the topic of this conversation, but I do think it's pretty interesting. We have built out more underground storage, and it's specifically tariffed for Portland General Electric, and there's a pipeline going directly to their Port Westward facility. So we provide them storage service directly for their gas generation. Importantly, part of our story is that we don't have any we don't have any bare steel or cast iron on our system. Now, that has to do also with the history of the interstate pipeline coming through our neck of the woods. So the Northwest Pipeline wasn't built out into the 50s, and we didn't see a lot of growth till the 80s, 90s, and 2000s. And so we really do, for all intents and purposes, have a pretty modern system. But credit to our stakeholders and our regulators. In 2001, we approached our commission and said, we want to get all of the bare steel and cast iron out of our system. At the current rate that we are going, it will take X years. We believe that with your support, we can probably do this in about 20, I think was the time frame that we thought we could do it. And we developed what the System Integrity Program, which was really designed to accelerate the removal of that bare steel and cast iron. And we are now proud to say, as of 2015, we have zero bare steel and cast iron in our system. And of course, there were annual prudence reviews, and there was a lot of discussions before my time, but a lot of discussions on how that's developed, what type of information is needed, how do you demonstrate that what these projects are and that they've been completed on time to allow for an annual cost recovery. But it's a huge part of our story going forward, because now we do have a very modern system. Jump to the next slide here. All right, so I mentioned that 90% of our service territory is in Oregon, so I'm going to focus on Oregon right now. And really, this goes to what I talked about. All of a sudden, we're becoming a decarbonization company. And in Oregon, all of this is new. It's complicated. It's very ambitious. And for gas utilities, I would say in particular, there's a lot of uncertainty. Until December of 2023, natural gas utilities were subject to the Climate Protection Plan. And that rule required us to reduce our covered emissions 90% by 2050. 90% emissions reduction by 2050. This rule was invalidated by the Court of Appeals on procedural grounds in December of 2023. So it had been an active rule for a couple years, and then got through the court system and it was invalidated. But the Oregon DEQ is working to reestablish that program now. On the other side of the energy equation is the Oregon Clean Energy Plan, and that is what electric utilities are subject to. And this requires electric utilities to be 100% clean by 2040. 100% clean in about 16 years. So both systems right now, gas and electric, are on incredibly steep declining emissions trajectories, and both systems are going to require monumental type of perhaps investments, or at least thinking and creative strategies to do what is being asked of us. It is huge. So I just wanted to point that out in how we're now thinking, okay, we've got to be a decarbonization company. Next, I want to talk to the other side of that, got to be the energy company. We got to still do what we do, which is deliver the energy that we provide in those really, really cold snaps. And I've got a recent example of this because we had a 5-day cold snap in January that was a record breaker for us. And these numbers probably don't mean much to you all, and I apologize for that because every system's going to be different and the throughput's going to be different. The takeaway here is that it's records. Records are being broken. More people are relying us on that really cold event than ever before, and we're having more withdrawal from our storage than ever before. And I also noted too here, we did interrupt all of our interruptible customers, and maybe that's interesting or maybe it's not, but I always find that it gets a little bit overlooked that we have a really incredible built-in demand response on the gas system through interruptible customers. And we're trying to start to kind of reframe interruptible to really be this pretty substantial demand response tool that we have that's already built into our rates. And we've heard a lot from our customers just in terms of the resiliency of the system. We just didn't have that many outages in those 5 days, and the numbers on the electric system are significantly larger. And then we had ICF do some analysis in terms of, so what was the energy delivered during that peak hour? Because we've got to plan to that peak hour. So we did this on an MMBTU per hour basis. And the takeaway here is there's just a lot of energy going through the gas system when it's cold. And that's compared to our 2 electric providers that we have some system overlap with in the Portland metro region. One other interesting note about customer use that's a little unrelated to this, but it's maybe something that your utilities that you regulate are seeing as well, is that we're actually seeing a little bit of an increase in residential usage right now. This was a bit of a surprise to us because we have invested substantially into energy efficiency for the last couple of decades, and we saw the progress we were making on residential homes and lowering the usages in those homes. And then COVID hit, and people changed their behavior and they changed the way they live. And we see more people. Our working hypothesis right now is that we see more people staying at home, and so maybe they go to work, into work 2 days a week, and they're at home 3 days a week, and or maybe there's 2 people in the home and they split it up so that one person's always in the home and one person's at work, and vice versa. And so, but what that means for us is that chances are that furnace is on a little bit more. And so it's not something that we're particularly happy about because of all the progress we've made with energy efficiency, but it is a real fact that we are wrestling with right now. And then one other interesting note as well is that and I'll come back to this later, but our existing customer base compared to a new premise. So if we hook up a new house to the system and run the service line, put a meter in, and it's a new home, the new home is using 200 therms less than an existing home, which is at about 660. So the work that's going on the building codes and these tighter envelopes around homes and the energy efficient appliances getting put in homes, it's making a significant difference in the consumption patterns of our customers. So with that, I wanted to just share what it looks like for the CapEx profile for at least our gas utility right now, and with some of these demands that are on our system. And I sometimes speak of these in terms of discrete capital and non-discrete capital, and I'm not sure if those terms are familiar at all or just something that we kind of made up at Northwest Natural, but discrete, I'm thinking about the types of projects that don't come around very often, maybe a year, 2 year, 3 year planning, and some sort of large capital project that we do. And then on the non-discrete side are or maybe it's vehicles, maybe it's equipment. I can't tell you exactly when a new F-150 and what the exact truck is that we're going to buy, but I know that we're going to replace a certain amount of trucks every year, and that's going to make up part of our capital profile. And those are the non-discrete type of run rate capital. So looking at this pie chart, winter peak capacity, what I talked about, the betterments and the reinforcements, those are significant, and those are investments in our storage systems, and then to some extent pipeline reinforcements as well. I'll try and stick with the discrete projects first. RNG, we had just announced that we a project with WM, formerly Waste Management, where we will be developing an RNG production on site at a landfill in Wenatchee, Washington. Land and structures, this is our facilities and our resource centers, and this is something that may be somewhat unique about our system, is that we're sitting on the Cascadia subduction zone. And there wasn't as much sophisticated knowledge about the seismic activity in the Pacific Northwest until recently. Certainly much more sooner than some of these facilities were built out in the system, our resource centers. And these resource centers were already old. And now we had to go back and say, all right, are they seismically retrofit? Are they seismically operable in a seismic event? Do we need to retrofit them? Can we get safety crews out if there was a seismic event? And so our 10-year roadmap on facilities has really been focusing on hardening our facilities and our resource centers. And that's something too in rate cases where we'll bring in a facilities project and we'll talk about why we did it, of course, and why it was needed. But we also share that roadmap. We share the projects that are coming. We put some testimony down talking about the next project. We're not asking for cost recovery, but we just want you to be aware that there's another big project coming. And so that's part of our facilities. And then IT, everyone here has probably heard enough about IT modernization, but the obsolescence of some of these systems, the end of life, the end of support, and this transition to the cloud migration, it is a huge lift around all utilities, I think is fair to say, and it's also acutely challenging because for us the cloud asset has a 5-year life, and so you really have to be overlaying some regulatory thinking about rate cases when you're investing that much in IT. And by the time you get your new rates, that you may only be recovering 60% of the asset. So that has a special regulatory kind of lag challenges with that investment, and you can see just how big of a slice of the pie that is. And then on the run rate side, I'll talk about customer growth a little bit later, but yes, those are meters, services, mains. We also have TIMP and DIMP, and so we have a program where we make a certain amount of pipelines every year piggable. We're also putting in excess flow valves in high consequence areas. And also we have the seismic issues. So we're identifying geohazards where there could be a landslide and going in and doing the hardening on that side as well. And with those, I should say from a regulatory perspective, we do have an annual safety plan that we file at our commission every year, and it details every single safety project that we are working on and that we intend to complete in that year. And that way, when we ultimately do come in for a rate case, no surprises about what we are, the capital profile for our ILI spend or something like that. And the last one, public works, and there's this kind of a hodgepodge, but this is also a growing share of the pie recently. So this is when the jurisdiction calls and says, we've got some sort of public works project, maybe we're expanding a road, or maybe we're working on a bridge, and they call all the utilities, not just the gas utility, but come in and we got some work to do in the right of way. We're seeing more of those. Can't necessarily say why that's the case, but we're seeing more. And then some of these jurisdictional permitting obligations are getting, there's just more to do in terms of how we do our work, or how we complete the project and clean up the project. And all of that just has additional costs associated with it. So it's kind of an interesting, I don't know if that's the best word, but it's something that we're watching carefully in terms of, you know, how our pie is taking shape here in an expanding role for public works. Got a couple more slides. So with all of this, how do we see the gas system going forward? I feel like I'm kind of really banging the drum on this one, but gotta be safe. Gotta invest in our winter peak resources. Investing in our storage system is so critical. We are pursuing demand response and non-pipeline solutions. And I guess I would say there are a lot of challenges with that as well. Historically, I think all gas utilities would probably say, like, how do we know when a reinforcement is needed? Well, there's low pressure there. That mindset and that has to change. So you need to start building in the technological capabilities and the people that can do this type of planning, that aren't looking at a real-time basis on lower system pressures, but they're able to analyze the situation and say, okay, 10 years from now, we're going to see lower pressures. And so now we have to take action to avoid an investment 10 years from now. That's a change. And I think, you know, that gets a little bit overlooked in some of the conversations that we have in our space, where it's not an immediate pivot on a dime. We need to build this out and plan for it, because it will take time. Talked about LDCs being decarbonization companies, at least when you have climate regulation that says, you know, thou shall reduce emissions by so much. That's really what it turns into. And so that does require more investment. That does require more human resources to do this work. And then it's going to go beyond RNG, but hydrogen, geothermal networks, and then non-traditional utility services. I don't even know what that is. I don't know what it is yet. You know, there's going to be advancements where we are looking towards the future, where new technologies we're going to have to, at the minimum, explore. I know this group has had a session on IRP planning, and so I won't get too far into this one, this last bullet on the gas and electric systems being interconnected, but I do want to call it out, and just how we see the importance of joint system planning. So we're in two states, Washington and Oregon, where we've had gas IRP planning for a long time, and it's worked really, really well for us. But now we're in this environment where these systems and the energy systems are just becoming so interconnected, and we do this IRP planning. We put a microscope over the natural gas system, and we do our plan, and then there's a microscope over the electric system, and they do their plan. And there's not that transfer of information where we both can take this data and plan, because we're just a gas company, and we overlap with Portland General and Pacific Power. And so it's not like we have combo utilities in our footprint. And so there's a lot of information that doesn't get transferred between systems. And so for us, we see a future where we would really embrace hybrid systems. So that's an electric heat pump in a house. We're embracing that. But we think the pragmatic approach is to keep a furnace in there. And that's going to do wonders for us, because one, it's going to reduce our emissions because it's reducing our throughput, because that heat pump is going to be operating in mild temperatures. But also, I mean, it's really, it's going to alleviate a lot of the electric capacity constraints in the Pacific Northwest. And also at a time in the cold, dark mornings when the wind isn't blowing, and that's when you would switch over the heat pump to a furnace, and that's when the gas system would do what the gas system does, which is really be a workhorse in the wintertime. And we do see this vision of the gas utility being this massive kind of battery pack that the electric system can put on when it gets really, really cold. So one more slide. Thank you so much for bearing with me as I go through all of this, but I want to talk a little bit about our approaches to some proposals that we have. And this is again, a mindset change for a gas utility, but we want to embrace the low use customer, but we want to do that while protecting our existing customer base. And so how are we thinking about that? Well, I said that new premises are using 200 therms less than our existing customer base. So there's an issue there. Are we recovering the full amount from that customer that would be expected to through their volumetric rate? And the answer is probably no. And so what does that mean? That means our existing customer base could be, to some extent, subsidizing a new customer from year to year. And so we want to change that. And we're proposing a higher fixed charge, a significantly higher fixed charge for a new premise that comes onto the system, because we know we're not going to get the volumetric margin from them. The other thing we're doing is proposing a low use line extension allowance, and that provides a higher allowance for low use customers. And again, this is kind of breaking that link that's always existed between a line extension allowance and throughput. And we're doing that by, in our economic analysis that we use for an LEA, and our commission told us to do this, so we're taking a directive here, but it really is, it's great how it kind of plays out in an economic model where if you assign the full environmental compliance cost of a new customer on day one and put that in, well, I mean, we're using a discount cash flow model, but if in economic model, all of a sudden it turns the line extension on its head, and a low use customer is actually going to get a higher allowance, and a higher use customer is going to get a lower allowance. And that's because the low use customer is just going to have less of a compliance obligation and those costs associated. The last thing I have here, I know there was a question about rate volatility and how do we manage rates here? And this is something that I've been thinking a lot about, because we just filed a pretty large rate case at the end of December, and it's north of 10%. And I read the industry news, and so I know you all experience this as well. It seems like there are a lot of rate cases that are north of 10% these days, where before there just wasn't. And so I am really trying to kick off a conversation around multi-year plans. And so, because you can have a 10% increase over if a utility stays out for a few years, or if you set it up right and put the right safeguards in place, you can have 3%, 3%, 3%. And I just think that's a much more sustainable pathway for our customers going forward when we do see upward rate pressure in the future. So with that, thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to the conversation that's coming.
Thank you so much, Zach. And I'm going to ask everyone for a little flexibility and forgiveness. I've been a horrible moderator. I have not been watching the clock very well, but I don't want to rush Paul, who's been patiently waiting to give his presentation. So if folks are, can offer a little bit of grace to eat into the second part of the, the block time, so we can, get through the remaining presentation and have some good Q&A, I would appreciate that. So if folks are okay with that, without further ado, we have Paul Metro.
Thank you, Commissioner. Appreciate the opportunity to speak with NARUC today. My name is Paul Metro. I'm the director of the Infrastructure Academy in Pittsburgh. The last 35 years, I was with the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission. I was the expert witness in the Enforcement Bureau for cost of service, rate design, and rate base. And then the last 18 years of my career with the PUC, I was the director of pipeline safety and electric safety. As part of that venture in electric and gas safety, I was the National Association of Pipeline Safety Representatives chairman for 2 years. I also was the co-founder of the NARUC Pipeline Safety Subcommittee. I was vice chairman of that committee for 11 years. So what I'd like to do today is bring some of that regulatory background into my new life. I'm the director of the Infrastructure Academy Workforce Development, and sort of try to tie and marry into the energy transition with workforce development and some regulatory ideas that that I see coming down the road through this energy transition. Okay, next slide. So who we are and what we are, and I'll try to go through this really quick, Commissioner, is that we're a 2,000 square foot building in downtown Pittsburgh. It used to be the Allegheny County Vo-Tech School. They were going to raise the building. We purchased the building, and it is the most intriguing building in the United States. We get visitors from all across the European Union coming to the building. It's the one of the models for resilient and sustainable commercial buildings in the United States. We're globally recognized as a clean energy innovation hub. We have several universities that are partners with us in the building: Carnegie Mellon University, University of Pittsburgh, Penn State University, Duquesne University, all working together to investigate and study microgrids, direct current batteries, magnetics, and energy storage solutions. As part of the Infrastructure Academy, which falls under the Energy Innovation Center umbrella, our mission is to find jobs for men and women in disadvantaged communities and minority men and women in low carbon workforce, sustainable energy workforce. And we train, vet, and recruit these people, as you'll see later in the slides, to get better paying utility jobs. We're a model of public and corporate financing. The Department of Energy has been working with us recently. They want us to create this Energy Innovation Center concept and the Infrastructure Academy at 5 different hubs across the country. And we're excited. It looks like a great opportunity to get, at least from my perspective, to get men and women in disadvantaged communities across the country into better paying utility jobs. Okay, next slide. We are a clean energy transition company. And as I talked about, our big push in the Infrastructure Academy is workforce development. So far, in the last 2 years, we've got about 4,000 people in disadvantaged communities, new positions. That equates to about 86% of our grads that we graduated from our training school were employed, and 89% of those were people of color. The graduates from our training academy have earned and put into the economy in the Pittsburgh area about $54 million of earnings. And so far to date, we've trained about 1,800 incumbent workers through various natural gas utilities and electric utilities and water and sewer utilities. Okay, next. The Infrastructure Academy is essentially a next generation critical infrastructure and utility training. We do all types of utility training. We do, to the lowest level, we do hand tool, how to use a shovel, how to use a tape measure, how to do mathematics, how to speak English. We do several classes on gas safety and electric safety, and we recruit, vet, and train workers in these disadvantaged communities to get better paying utility jobs. Okay, next slide. 4 takeaways from my presentation is I want to go over a little bit about the United States energy projections. And as you go through the slides, as we go through this really quickly, you'll notice that the U.S. Energy Information Administration is projecting a robust natural gas market through 2050. Our U.S. natural gas pipeline network needs to be safe and reliable to deliver natural gas, and also to incorporate in the future non-carbon gaseous fuels. Workforce training is vital in the pipeline industry, and it has the potential, if we do this correctly, to benefit disadvantaged communities now and in the energy transition through 2050. And these will be positions that would be generational changes to these men and women. And then some policy recommendations regarding natural gas emissions and in retrofitting pipelines. Okay, next one. So far, what we know to this point in our energy transition is we've got to reduce fossil fuel consumption of coal, oil, and natural gas. Additional investments in domestic natural gas will be extremely vital. We've seen that the investments already has reduced our carbon footprint, and replacing some of these existing natural gas pipelines, as some of the other speakers have talked about, with new natural gas pipelines that can handle zero carbon fuels transportation will be a key to our energy transition through 2050. Next slide. the potential sustainable energy technology advances, and these are just some issues to watch out for. But as I went through and looked at the development of some of our energy transitions, we thought we'd be further ahead on, for example, on battery development, and we're not. But there's some other advances that could occur. As through the Energy Innovation Center, we see some huge advances in some technologies that are going to come out in the next 2 or 3 years by the universities that are working with us. And those may change the natural gas consumption projections. So as I go through these projections, be aware that these projections are just that, they're guesses, but new technology may change the future projections as we go through this. Customer demands will drive the market. What we're seeing right now is electric vehicle demand is slowing for various number of reasons. 50% of the U.S. households right now cook with some type of carbon fuel, whether it's natural gas, propane, coal, or wood. Converting to an all-electric society will be very slow and costly. In Pennsylvania alone, 55% of the residential customers in Pennsylvania use either propane or natural gas. We have about 12 million residents in Pennsylvania, so almost 6 million of those of our residents are using either propane or natural gas to heat or cook with. Disadvantaged communities, I'd like to stress this because this is extremely important, and we've seen this in other technology advances, but disadvantaged communities will suffer the most during the energy transition if the transition energy is not competitive and we don't train these workers to be able to enter into that market. Next slide. This is from the Energy Information Administration. This is their latest projection. This is essentially just a 70-year review of where natural gas consumption was. And you can see in all sectors, it's increased mostly in the industrial and electric power sector. And in the last, I'd say 20 years, 19 years, you've seen the electric power generation from natural gas increase substantially. And that's basically because we're reducing our use of coal-fired coal plants and nuclear power plants. Next slide. This is some of the projections from the EIA. And as you can see, that total energy consumption is going to increase, even just based on normal projections, it's going to increase. There's some highs and lows that they show here. But even with the highs and lows, it's going to be an increase in energy consumption through 2050. Next slide. Natural gas consumption, depending on economic developments. If it's a high economic development in the future, you're going to see natural gas consumption increase dramatically. If it's low economic recovery or economic adventure for the United States, natural gas will probably be reduced. But the reference line, the baseline, looks like it's going to stay pretty much even through 2050. Next slide. And this shows a little bit about the natural gas consumption in the industrial sector. It's going to increase, whether you look at low oil and gas supplies or high oil and gas supplies, it's going to increase according to EIA. Electric power sector for natural gas depend on the growth rate, but it looks like it could reduce a little bit by 2050. But then it also, toward the end of 2050, it increases. So that's essentially just a guess from the EIA. Next slide. As some of the other speakers talked about, our natural gas pipeline is highly integrated network system. We have about 3 million miles of mainland and other pipelines that use natural gas production areas and storage field for consumers. In 2021, they delivered about 27.6 trillion cubic feet of natural gas to about 77.7 million consumers. We have if you consider consumers are industrial and commercial and residential, and you break that down a little bit, if you look at just the residential, the people in the United States, we have about 365 million people in the United States. Those consumers, if they all were consumers, that comes out to about 21% of our population has some use of natural gas. Next slide. In Pennsylvania, and this is critical to most of the gas producing states in our country, but the API recently put out a statistic for Pennsylvania, And essentially what it says is that oil and gas industry supported more than 420,000 jobs in Pennsylvania and contributed over 75 billion toward our state's economy. That's an incredible effect on our economy. We can't just throw natural gas away. There's so many people dependent on this, and our economy in Pennsylvania is dependent on it. We need a robust natural gas system for the future. Next. In that API report, they talk about the number of jobs in the natural gas and oil industry. In Pennsylvania, we do have an oil industry. Most of the jobs are in natural gas, but we do have some drilling for oil in Western PA. There's an additional 3.6 million jobs that are directly affected by natural gas. Natural gas provides about 40.3 billion in labor income, which is 7.5% of our state's total. It has about 9% of our GDP in Pennsylvania, which is an incredible amount of money. So natural gas is an important factor in our state's, our Commonwealth's economic driving machine. Next stat. We lead the world in natural gas oil production, and you can see, and I'll go through this real quick, about 10.8 million jobs in the United States are related to natural gas and oil development. It produces about $909 billion in labor income, and it supports nearly 1.8 trillion in gross domestic product. That's about 7.5% of our gross domestic product. Next slide. I know this is hard to see, but this is just showing the number of miles of pipeline systems and broken down by distribution, gathering, or transmission. And we have approximately 3 million miles of pipelines that are jurisdictional in the country. Next slide. This again talks about the natural gas network. We talked about this. We can go to the next slide. One of the speakers talked about peak day demand, and natural gas network. When you design a network, you're designing it for a certain peak day demand, and that's what this is talking about. On a peak demand day, the natural gas network can deliver up to 4 times as much energy as an electric network on a peak day. That's critical and vital to our energy supplies to meet our energy demands when we're meeting that peak day, whether it's in the wintertime or summertime. Next slide. FERC Order 636 came out in the late 80s, and essentially what this did was it created a new secondary market for transmission pipeline capacity. And the reason I mention this is this was a game changer in the industry. It made pipelines competitive, and it also created a spot market for pipeline gas. So without this order that was put into effect by FERC, we wouldn't be here talking about natural gas the way we are. It's the initial driver that reduced costs in our industry. Next slide. Some of the other speakers talked about this, so I'll go really quick through it. Most of our distribution systems were developed between 1950 and 1970. A lot of dollars put into the system. We have an increased demand by end users and driving new pipeline construction, and thus that's increasing the requirements on natural gas infrastructure. I just recently spoke to someone in Illinois, and they were talking about how they thought natural gas infrastructure was going to slow down as they go through new clean air developments. But in actuality, they signed on thousands of new natural gas customers, which the industry as a whole needs to sit back and try to examine that and find out why that's happening when we're trying to reduce our carbon footprint, but we're also signing up new customers in the gas industry. That I know some of the other speakers talked about that, but that's something we need to look at a little bit deeper as to why is that occurring. Next slide. After the San Bruno incident in California and the Allentown incident in Pennsylvania, there was a call to action that talked about pipeline safety. And in that, I testified for in front of the National Transportation Safety Board for San Bruno. And the NTSB was pushing very, very hard, very firmly to the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, PHMSA, that they needed to get onto this integrity management. They needed to replace risky pipes, the cast iron, bare steel, and the new generation, the old generation plastic. So as part of that, and what came out from that, we'll see some stats that risky pipes decreased dramatically from 2009, 10, and 11 timeframes, and it was driven by what occurred at San Bruno and Allentown. And in Pennsylvania in 2011, we had identified about 13,000 miles of risky pipeline. The average cost of those pipes to replace per mile is about $1.1 million. Tremendous amount of money needed for that. The pipeline mileage now in Pennsylvania, after we implemented a pipeline replacement program, is down to about 9,500 miles, 9,000 miles. That's a great progression as to where we were, but we still have a lot of work to get out the risky pipe here in PA. Next slide. Let's see. PHMSA has some new safety requirements, going to require some updates to the physical infrastructure of gas pipeline distribution systems. For example, installing remote control valves, leak detection equipment, and emissions reduction. So PHMSA has come out with new regulations that have said, states, you have to do X, Y, Z, and these are the X, Y, Zs, and in a particular emissions reduction. So if you have pipe that's leaking, you need to stop that leaking and don't let it leak for as long as you normally would do it. Next slide. I'll go through these real quick. And you guys can look at this on your leisure. This is a total from PHMSA of all the gas distribution wrought iron pipeline mileage left in the states. Next slide. This shows the how especially the graph to the right shows in about 2009, 2010 when PHMSA implemented distribution integrity management and transmission integrity management, we started to see cast iron, wrought iron pipes coming out of the ground. And the slope of the curve is excellent. That's what we want to see. And there's still some states that have some of this pipe in the ground, but they're hopefully working to get that out of the ground. Next slide. This is bare steel pipeline and all the bare steel that's in the ground for the different states. You can see your state on the slide. Next slide. Next slide. And again, you can see for bare steel mains in 2009-10 timeframe, there's a huge drop in pipe that was in the ground because states became active, especially after San Bruno and Allentown, and said, we got to get this pipe out of the ground. Next slide. This talks about integrity management and when it was implemented by PHMSA. And I also have a description and discussion about the Pennsylvania Long-Term Infrastructure Improvement Plan, the LTIP. And it's many other states have the exact same plan. I know Illinois has something similar, California, many of the other states, Ohio, New York. So it's nothing new, but it's an important plan that the states need. It's a tool in the toolbox to get rid of this risky pipe. Next page. So when you replace these pipes or looking at replacing them, I think it's very important. And I sat and talked with several of the gas pipeline distribution utilities in Pennsylvania, and they are working on this. So when they invest to replace pipe or put in new pipe, they're looking at what type of pipe do we need? What type of pipe material do we need to be able to transport zero carbon fuels? For example, such as hydrogen. Hydrogen has issues that it can embrittle steel pipes. It sometimes, under certain circumstances, can precipitate out a plastic pipe. So we have to be cognizant of that. But the gas utilities, the gas distribution utilities, understand that gas consumption will go down as we go to a clean environment. They have a network of system that can help the United States and help their areas can move some of these zero non-carbon fuels, such as hydrogen. And that network's in place, and let's continue it. It's easier to fix it up now than to wait till 2050 and try to build an entirely new system. These systems should be forward-looking and designed to transport hydrogen. And then I have some of the hydrogen properties that as states you need to be aware of. It's got a lower BTU than natural gas, but it's lighter than air, can precipitate out of pipes, causes embrittlement and leaks, and it has a wider range of explosive range than natural gas. So natural gas explodes between 5 and 15% of gas in the air. hydrogen's around 5 to 76%. So hydrogen is extremely explosive, and you have to be cognizant of that as you develop and put hydrogen in these zero carbon pipelines. Next slide. This is this is what I live for right now, is workforce training. We had U.S. Secretary of Energy Jennifer Granholm has been to the Energy Innovation Center several times. She loves coming to the building, and she talks about some of the challenges in an energy transition. And she talks about that we have to look at training people. That's going to be the key to get to this transition. That's what we do here at the Energy Innovation Center, the Infrastructure Academy. The only restraint in the clean energy transition is the trained workforce. You're not going to get any of this transition unless you have someone that can do it. And it's clear to me, and I think it's very clear to the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission, because they implemented regulations on this, that we need to monitor and look at the workforce development. Why shouldn't the workforce mirror the service territories in which they serve? For example, Lancaster, Pennsylvania has about 44% Hispanic population. Why shouldn't the utility that provides gas service to that, why shouldn't they have about 44% of their workforce as Hispanics? So those are the kind of issues that are going to be key to the public utilities across the nation as they look at this transition. Just don't look at, we got to reduce our carbon footprint, but how can we take advantage of this and help the disadvantaged communities? Next slide. This shows a little bit about a breakdown of the economic impact on oil and gas in certain states, and especially on employment. In these top states, Pennsylvania, for example, direct and indirect, our 27% of our workforce is affected by natural gas in some way. Next slide. This is a breakdown of demographics and characteristics that the U.S. Energy and Employment from the U.S. Department of Energy put out recently. And as you go through this, you can see that most of the people who work in the energy workforce are males, very few females. And then the other stat is if you look at race, 75, the energy workforce average, 75% are white. This gives us an opportunity that we can provide workforce training and get men and women in disadvantaged communities into the energy workforce. It clearly shows that here that we have that opportunity. Let's take advantage of that. Next slide. This shows from the U.S. Department of Energy the jobs that came about from the energy industry. A tremendous amount of jobs, 51,000 in natural gas, 58,000 in petroleum. There's going to be jobs in the natural gas field between now and 2050 and beyond. And it's difficult, as I do a lot of recruiting and vetting and training, it's difficult to find workers who want to go into that field. And we tell them, hey, the average salary in Pennsylvania, for example, for a natural gas worker in the field starts at 65,000. After 6 months, you're going to be at 100,000. And after 1 year, after you get through your apprenticeship program, you're going to be at around $150,000 with overtime. That's generational changes to the workforce. These men and women, the dollars that they earn in these new energy jobs will translate to their kids and their grandchildren. It's a tremendous factor that we need to look at in this energy transition. We have jobs available. We just got to get these men and women trained, and we can help the men and women in disadvantaged communities to take advantage of this. Next slide. Justice 40 Initiative was created by President Biden as an executive order 14008. And this essentially is what the United States follows when it looks at equity in hiring. And I talked about it already that Pennsylvania, the Public Utility Commission has passed regulations regarding diversity and energy transition. There's a lot of demand for technical field workers, not just in Pennsylvania, but all the other gas and oil producing states. And the utilities want their workforce to mirror the populations in which they have their service territory in. Next slide. So at the Infrastructure Academy, we have several, in Pittsburgh, we have about 450 partners. These are partners in religious groups, associations, unions, community organizers. We train, our training program for gas, for example, is a 3-week training program. So our secret sauce is recruiting, vetting, and training, but we don't just train people, recruit them and vet them and say, okay, here you go find a job. We only do this if we have an agreement with the public utility. So we have partnerships with People's Gas in Pittsburgh and Columbia Gas of PA, the NiSource company. They come to us and say, we're going to have 15 positions opened in 3 months. So we'll go out, recruit, vet, and train. We get them prepared to go to the interview. We train them in how to answer interview questions, how to dress properly for an interview. We go through basic training for gas safety. We show them how to join pipe, how to do a little bit of welding, how to run a backhoe. We get them so that when they get in the interview, they're not at a disadvantage with other people who may have had that opportunity to do that or have some knowledge about that. And we've been very successful in this. And training them on life skills is important in this. And the 2 weeks hand-on training is important. That's our secret sauce. We don't just train them and throw them out to society. We require that the utilities have to interview these people. They don't have to hire them, but if they don't hire them, then we try to find out why they didn't. But we've been very successful in that. The stat shows about 89% of our graduates are still working with these utilities. Next slide. And that just another slide showing that how successful we've been in our training program. Next slide. New incumbent worker training, we're also into that. You have to be, the utilities have to be concerned with pipeline safety management systems. That's a safety culture issue, and PHMSA has been pushing that very hard. So that's also something that we train on. Next slide. So I only have, I think, 2 more slides out there. So the recommendation and policy issues that I recommend is that from a safety standpoint, by all means, you have to make sure that the pipeline distribution system, the natural gas is safe, and it has to be reliable. They have to follow the federal and state's pipeline safety regulations. They must be in compliance and they must be safe. That's the key to all these recommendations. First, you have to have a safe system. Next, talks about leaks. Why don't the states require that all, go back to the next slide, please. Why don't the states require that all natural gas utilities repair all leaks immediately? That would reduce the greenhouse effect, and it's also a safety issue, something that some states are looking at to implement. PHMSA is looking at it now. They've talked about it. They haven't required it yet, but they're getting close to that. Consider requiring jurisdictional natural gas utilities to retrofit the pipe. So if they're going to do a pipeline replacement program and they come into you for cost recovery, talk to them about, hey, we want to see this pipeline be able to be used for non-carbon fuels in the future. So if it costs a little bit more to do that, it would probably behoove the utility to design it to transport hydrogen and other non-carbon gases. And monitor the natural gas jurisdictional and utility workforce training and hiring. Create a baseline. Look at the demographics and compare to year with annual reports. Ensure that the workforce mirrors the service territory. The implementation of workforce training in disadvantaged communities will help everyone. It's not just we want to help minorities get jobs here or there. This is life-changing for the workforce. And I know I'm stressing this a lot, but this is life-changing for these disadvantaged communities and minorities in the service territories. And it's something that we missed, our country has missed in the past in other innovations, but we have the opportunity now to take advantage of that and get on it as we go through this energy transition. Next slide. Just an alert. These are from my old rate making days. There is something called a regulatory compact. It's an agreement between the utilities and the regulatory body. And I'm not an attorney. I'm an engineer, but I've litigated a lot of these cases. And because of regulatory compact, you'll be required to let the utility recover stranded costs if you give them orders to get rid of the natural gas distribution system. So We all went through stranded cost recovery in the early 2000s when we deregulated electric utilities and gas utilities, and the effect of the stranded costs on the ratepayers were huge, especially the ratepayers who could least afford to pay for the stranded cost recovery. Next slide. The stranded costs will make energy transition more expensive, no doubt. We have to start looking at if we can transfer those pipelines from natural gas to a non-carbon gas. That'll save on stranded costs. Now's the time to develop an energy transition policies associated with stranded costs. New energy alternatives, such as wind or solar, are normally more expensive without the government subsidies. We need to look at that and decide from an economic basis which is the best fuel to use. Disadvantaged community ratepayers have the least amount of flexibility in paying their rates due to energy transition. And we've seen that in early 2000s when we did the energy transition, the deregulation of the energy market. So we have to look back at history and take lessons learned from 2000 and 2001 as to what happened with rates in those. And then again, about 50% of the homes in Pennsylvania use some type of fossil fuel to heat or cook. Next slide. And that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. That was thanks for getting through those slides. I know it's a lot of information. I want to thank Nick and Zach as well. I appreciate everyone on the flexibility and time. NARUC is probably never going to ask me to moderate another panel because I wasn't watching the clock very carefully. I want to go into, I think this is the part where we stop recording.